In a 5-4 ruling today along partisan lines, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld President Donald Trump's travel ban on several predominantly Muslim countries. The ban limits the number of visas granted to travelers from 5 predominantly Muslim countries: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. It also adds restrictions to people in North Korea and Venezuela. This is the third version of the administration's travel ban. The ruling reverses a series of lower court decisions that have previously been struck down. The ban struck down the ban as illegal and unconstitutional for the last 15 months. Chief Justice Roberts supported the court's other 4 conservatives. In an issued opinion, he wrote the proclamation is within the, quote, scope of presidential authority. Today, President Trump applauded that decision with a lunch with congressional lawmakers.
Today's Supreme Court ruling just coming out, a tremendous success, a tremendous victory for the American people and for our Constitution. This is a great victory for our Constitution. We have to be tough, and we have to be safe, and we have to be secure. At a minimum, we have to make sure that we vet people coming into the country. We know who's coming in. We know where they're coming from.
CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid joins us now from the White House. Paula, this was a huge win for the president. Could the Supreme Court decision encourage President Trump and his administration to take even more aggressive moves to cut down on travel from more majority Muslim countries?
Well, you're right. This was a huge win. This was his first big victory at the Supreme Court, his first big legal challenge at the Supreme Court, and he won. So this was a rare day here at the White House where he gets to do a little bit of a victory lap, because here Chief Justice John Roberts, he upheld a very expansive definition of the president's authority to decide who comes in and out of this country. And yes, there is a possibility that he could add additional Muslim countries going forward. But the more immediate question is whether or not this will embolden the president on immigration. As we heard right there when he was meeting with congressional leaders, he reiterated his need to control who comes in and out of this country for national security. So the fact that the Supreme Court has handed him a victory here and validated this broad scope of his presidential authority on national security, we would expect this may embolden him in terms of his language and policy on the immigration issue.
We'll have to see how this really affects his approach with the immigration issue that's unfolding right now at the border. Now, in terms of the travel ban, this was the third version of the travel ban. And the Trump administration argued this version would be different and was considered a watered-down version of the original plan. How different was it really, and what were the important points that you think allowed the Supreme Court to uphold it?
Well, it's incredibly different. It's unlikely that the first travel ban that was issued just in his first few days in office, that really would have passed muster at the Supreme Court. I remember the day that was passed, we called the Department of Homeland Security. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea how they were going to implement it. That first travel ban, it had no exceptions for any sort of unique circumstances. It did appear to be sort of a blanket Muslim ban with no forward-thinking logistical coordination across administrations. For the second travel ban, the administration was a little more fully formed. At that point, he had a Department of Homeland Security chief, he had an attorney general, and they helped advise him based on things that judges had specifically said was wrong with the first one. Then they did another iteration before the second one got all the way to the Supreme Court, and it does seem to be a more fully realized version of this policy. There were surveys that they did with foreign governments to really vet each country in terms of whether or not those countries were actually providing accurate information about their citizens who are coming here. And they made a decision to include this group of countries, and it wasn't just predominantly Muslim countries. They obviously additionally added North Korea and Venezuela, so it seemed less like a quote-unquote Muslim ban that was knocked down in the previous versions and more like a national security policy.
I wonder how that ban on certain North Korean officials will affect this now moving forward, as things have been getting a little bit less tense between the U.S. and North Korea. But focusing on the border and the wall, President Trump said he will ask Congress for increased funding for the wall. How do you think this ruling will affect his efforts to receive that funding?
Well, it was interesting watching these congressional leaders who came here to the White House today. Many of them were hoping to get some answers on whether or not the president really does support the GOP compromise on immigration. And the first time the president mentioned immigration after taking a victory lap about the Supreme Court was to talk about funding for the border wall and how he continues to believe that that is essential to ensuring security at the border. He believes that wall would prevent people from coming here and also bringing drugs and other things here. He believes that really is the solution, and any sort of legislative compromise, he wants to make sure that he's not only getting the funding allocated, but it's actually authorized. And that was a key difference in the two GOP proposals on immigration. The more hardline approach we thought a lot of the president's supporters would really like. The problem with that is that the president wasn't guaranteed funding for a border wall. Now, the GOP compromise bill, that will give him the money for his border wall. But at this point, Adriana, it doesn't appear that that's actually going to have sufficient support to pass. In fact, the president just last week tweeted that they shouldn't even bother with it until they have an enormous red wave. He describes it a victory in the midterm elections to ensure that they have enough votes so he can get everything that he wants on immigration, including money for that border wall.
Paula Reid was breaking it down for us. Thank you so much.